So I really appreciate them to make sure everything goes correctly and smoothly. And before we get to your presentation, General, I just want to say a few words about Tim. Tim's a board member on the World Affairs Council. He represents, he's the CEO of the National Association of Veteran Serving Organizations. He's also represented the city of San Antonio with on the Commission for Veteran Affairs. He's a product of Rutgers, Notre Dame, and he's also worked at Operation Homefront, where my girlfriend works now. So that's great to see. And also thank you to SSS STS Systems for their support for sponsoring this program. I want to give all the time to you all, General Richardson, Tim. I will see you all in about 40 minutes.
Are we live yet, Armin?
Yes.
Terrific. Well, thank you, Armin. And on behalf of the entire board and staff of the World Affairs Council of San Antonio, welcome to our session on leading in an international crisis. I'm Tim Farrell. I'm a trustee of the World Affairs Council and also the CEO of the National Association of Veteran Serving Organizations, a member of the city's Commission on Veterans Affairs, and a Texas state leader and one of the veterans for Smart Power with the United States Global Leadership Coalition. And we're absolutely privileged today to have the Senior Army Commander in San Antonio, the Commander of U.S. Army North 5th Army, Lieutenant General Laura Richardson, here to share some perspective on leading in an international crisis. General, it's so great to have you with us, and again, thank you so much for taking part.
Well, thank you so much, Tim, and it's really my pleasure to be part of this forum and part of this day. You have been covering a lot of important topics with the World Affairs Council, and so some of my presentation today, I wanted to give you an idea of what Army North does, because we are neighbors with everybody right here in San Antonio and right here at Fort Sam Houston. And we have quite a relationship and a lot of firsts with San Antonio ever since from moving from the Alamo over here to Fort Sam. And San Antonio did not want the military to leave, and so they offered the military the highest place in the city, and also the limestone to build the quadrangle, which was really the depot for the frontier. And so, again, it's just really my honor to be your neighbor and to give a short presentation about what I do and what this great command at Army North 5th Army does, and for the nation. And I know that the international crisis, leading in an international crisis, but really some of what I'm going to be talking about today is the interagency, and I do a lot of crisis planning and a lot of crisis execution in this command, actually in our homeland. And so, but I'll talk to some of that today. And I know that you have great questions for me at the end. And so I'll go ahead and get started.
Terrific.
And I promise I'll leave time for questions at the end. But we'll go to the next chart. And what I'd like, and really what this highlights, I know there are a lot of words on that chart, but really if you look at the picture, it really focuses on, this is the area of operations, is what we call it, for U.S. Northcom. And I'm a subordinate command to U.S. Northcom. It's the combatant command. There's only 6 geographic combatant commands in the world. And U.S. Northcom is the one that has the homeland, which is the continental United States. It has Alaska. It has Mexico, Canada, as you can see there. I know it looks like the whole globe, but it's really not. It also includes Puerto Rico, U.S. Virgin Islands, and the Bahamas as well. Right to the left of that picture, I have U.S. Army North conducts, and that we conduct, and those are our 3 missions that we have for my organization. And I'm the Army component command to U.S. Northcom, which means I have the land. I'm responsible for everything that occurs on the land. There's also a Navy component, which covers all the blue water that's surrounding that area of operations. There's a Marine component and also an Air Force component. But my 3 mission sets are Homeland Defense, Defense Support of Civil Authorities, and also theater security cooperation. And I'll talk about each of these three as we go forward. So we can go to the next chart. And obviously with our global security environment, we are really at this point in time emerging from a period of strategic atrophy. And that is where we are with our U.S. military. And we're aware of that competitive military advantage and aware that it has been eroding over the time that we have been handling all of the operations that we've been doing in Afghanistan and Iraq and those sorts of things. And so China is a strategic competitor, leveraging military modernization, influence operations, and predatory economics to coerce neighboring countries to reorder the Indo-Pacific region to their advantage. Russia wants to shape a world consistent with their authoritarian model, seeking veto authority over nations on its periphery in terms of their government, economic, and diplomatic decisions, to shatter the NATO and to shatter the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and change European and Middle East security and economic structures to its favor. North Korea's outlaw actions and reckless rhetoric continue, and despite United Nations censor and sanctions, Iran continues to sow violence and remains the most significant challenge to Middle East stability. And threats to stability remain as terrorist groups with their long reach continue to murder innocent and threaten peace more broadly, as well as transnational criminal organizations destabilize, exploit our southern border. So increasingly, the security environment is also defined by rapidly technological changes, challenges from our adversaries in every operating domain, and the impact on current readiness from the longest continuous stretch of armed conflict in our nation's history. And so the domains that I'm talking about are the land, air, sea, cyber, and cyberspace. And so we have a lot of challenges in the global security environment. And so I wanted to make sure I touched on that because that impacts a lot of what we may encounter in the future in our homeland, and hopefully not. Let's go to the next chart. And so Homeland Defense, as I said, those three missions on that first chart, Homeland Defense is our #1 priority. And so given that global security environment, this #1 mission is vital to the defense of our country. And it's the #1 priority also in the National Defense Strategy of 2018. So for decades, the United States has enjoyed uncontested or dominant superiority in every operating domain. We could generally deploy forces where we wanted. We could assemble them where we wanted and operate how we wanted. But today, every domain is contested. The 2018 National Defense Strategy acknowledges the homeland is no longer a sanctuary. And during conflict, we must anticipate attacks against critical defense government and economic infrastructure in the homeland. So I know that sounds very doomsday. We are the doomsday command that plans for this, thinks about this, and tries very hard in terms of not being surprised by something that may occur by our adversaries. And we're very much well aware of what our adversaries are doing. And let's go to the next chart, please. So in terms of our theater security cooperation role, we do this as part of the Cooperative Defense of America. And so I feel so honored. I have 3 flags that are listed there with those countries of Canada and Mexico as our partners. And I have a military-to-military relationship with both Canada and Mexico. And quite honestly, it's really my honor to do that. And through our military-to-military relationship, we can bring others to the table in order to work problems, work issues along the border. For example, I have 2,600 active duty soldiers and Marines on 2,000 miles of the southwest border that's in support of the Department of Homeland Security and CBP. And so we've been doing that mission now since October of 2018. And so if you really think about what I just talked about, the security, the global security environment, the northern approaches through Canada into our country, the southern approaches from Mexico into our country are very, very important, obviously, for the national security and national defense of our nation. But we do several exercises throughout the year. We're getting ready to do a panel to talk about the land power with all of the Canadian Army next week. I talk once a month with the General of the Sedena Army, which is the Mexican Army, General Mendoza. And then we have, I run the Border Military Commanders Program, where we'll have CBP, Army North, Sedena, and we work issues that we have along the border to make it safer and to help reduce illegal crossings along our border. But I'd like to highlight one of the pictures there on the bottom right. And that was an exercise that we did with one of the military zone regions. And that's the military commander, Lieutenant General Lohman on the left in the middle, and that's me on the right. And we have Sedena soldiers and US soldiers, engineers. And the scenario actually was a hurricane that hit both Texas and Mexico. And it straddled that, knocked out a bridge, and the Mexico side was unable to receive help in order to, as this bridge was knocked out. And what they did, the engineers together built this bridge that myself and General Lohman then took a Humvee across after they built it. And they did such a fantastic job, but it was just working together to solve, something as great as that, being able to get critical care across that bridge that had been knocked out by that storm. So I'll go to the next chart. And this is our third mission that we do in Army North. And so this is pretty fantastic. It's got a lot of things on that slide, but really this is all the things that we do in defense support of civil authorities. And so, we talked about international. I would say working with the interagency sometimes is like being, working in the international, international crises or in terms of what you're trying to achieve. And quite honestly, in the military, we're used to being establishing like a unity of command, but really it's a unity of effort when we're talking about the interagency. The military is part of the national response framework that we are really lucky to have here in the United States. But quite honestly, regardless of whether you're in the United States or I'm working in Afghanistan on the ISAF staff and trying to work initiatives and things like that, a lot of times you don't want the United States to be in the lead. You want that country that you're there supporting to be in the lead, and you're there to train, advise, assist them. And so, but these are a lot of the things, these are what we have done over the past year. I got into command last July, and quite honestly, you can see Hurricane Dorian up there on the top left that we encountered in September of last year. This quickly turned in right after the hurricane to disaster relief, foreign disaster response to the Bahamas for about a month after Dorian. The top right there of the United States, that was our COVID response. We have never had every FEMA region in the United States activated. We normally at the most would have 2 or 3 FEMA regions at the very most. And so in a homeland defense scenario, this is what we normally exercise, but we've only exercised it. We've never done anything for that's actually occurred until COVID-19. And like I said, every FEMA region was activated. I actually have 10 personnel led by a colonel that is embedded with all 10 of the FEMA regions around the country. And so being able to be a part of that March, April, and May timeframe We have medical providers from the active duty military that are serving in Texas and California still to this day. And they're getting ready to redeploy here in the next couple of weeks. So we'll keep our fingers crossed on the COVID that we don't have any more states that need our active military help. But we're here if we're needed, and we'll see what happens with that. I have a picture of the southwest border. I mentioned that already. That's on the left-hand side towards the bottom there. In the middle, I have pictures of COVID, cyber attacks. We currently have 250 soldiers in Northern California right now helping the National Interagency Fire Center with wildland firefighting. And there's a second battalion of 250 personnel that are going to get called up to help with that as well. I think that's going to happen. That they're going to go to Southern California to do that, and there might be emerging requirements for the state of Oregon as well. Those haven't officially come on the net yet. And all the other things that I've listed there. We also give support to national special security events. We call them NSSE events. And so those are listed: the UN General Assembly, the State of the Union, Democratic and Republican national conventions. We support with capabilities, military capabilities, just in case something were to happen. And then if we don't have enough to do already, we have the Department of Defense's CBRN, which is the chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear enterprise under us. And we also have the small organization that goes out and certifies the capabilities of not only our assets, but also the National Guard's assets in every state for CBRN hazards. So we'll go to the next chart. In terms of COVID, I wanted to talk about that a little bit because really that was my latest crisis to really operate in, and that really challenged our thinking in terms of how to respond to a whole of nation response. And so in the center there, I have the United States, and as I said, we exercise these things all year round. For the really big, terrible events. And so when this actually occurred for real, all FEMA regions were activated. In the homeland, Department of Defense is normally in support of a lead federal agency. And so rarely, unless it was like our nation was attacked, would Department of Defense be in the lead. And so most of the things that we respond to, we're in support of a lead federal agency. It's generally not DoD. In this particular case, it started out with DHHS and then switched over to DHS with FEMA. And so I have different colors there of how we split up the country in terms of how I was going to command and control the active military assets that were being called up to support the country with medical providers. And so I have pictures there because I always think pictures show a million words of things. And so the top center picture, I know it looks like a bunch of vehicles, but it's a bunch of vehicles. It actually is. And it was stepping off all of the cubicles that were being built by the Corps of Engineers or by a contractor. And they were going to establish an Army hospital inside the CenturyLink Center in Seattle. So that's a picture of the CenturyLink Center before they had this hospital erected, this Army hospital. In the bottom right, I actually have the Temple University in Philadelphia picture of how they took the basketball arena and turned that into an alternate care facility there. This was not Army equipment that was set up in this particular facility, but this was a contract that they had laid out, and they did a really fantastic job laying that out. The middle picture there at the bottom in the middle is actually the Boston Convention Center, and they did the same thing. They set up a huge alternate care facility inside of the Boston Convention Center. The left picture there beside Boston, bottom left, That's actually a picture of Army equipment setting up 2 ICU hospitals inside of the Jacob Javits Center in New York City. And again, these alternate care facilities were empty event centers that were being turned into a hospital. And that took a lot of effort. It took a lot of thinking through how do you set up the infrastructure of a hospital inside of an empty event center. And with this very aggressive disease, we know that this is a very aggressive lung disease and requires a lot of high flow oxygen for the folks that are very sick, the ones that end up needing ICU care. So with that, I'll go to the next chart, and I'm leading into leadership in a crisis and some of the things that I had to think through. And so the last 3 charts that I have really get after that. And in terms of being confronted with a threat or an enemy that was very, we didn't know a lot about COVID when COVID started. And so things were, you would go through 1 week of time that really felt like 3 months of time, literally, because so much was changing so fast. And so being the Land Component Command and being the headquarters that was responsible for the active military that moved out and was sent to New York City first. That was the first place that we went to. And that at the same time, I had another 2 hospital centers from the Army that were moving out to the Seattle CenturyLink Center to set up and support them as well. And I will tell you that the lessons learned and the best practices, the pictures there say it all. Right there, smack in the middle, is the National Response Framework. And the National Response Framework obviously has iterated, I think, over time and through disasters and emergencies that have occurred. But I would say that this validated the United States National Response Framework. And so as I work with Canada and Mexico, and we train these things and we have lessons learned, forums and things like that to talk about what we did. We share all of this and how what we have in place now really, really works. Top left there, if you have a special situation, you got to figure out what special advisors you need, right? I am not a doctor. I am a helicopter pilot. And so I knew I needed a doctor on my staff. That slot happened to be empty, by the way, in March. And the Chief of Staff of the Army said, Laura, what do you need? And I had a list about 5 things that I rattled off right there. And one of them was a trauma or emergency room physician, a doctor. And I got that immediately on my staff. But I also had some other things, because what we learned is that some of the modeling that was being done was wrong at the first part of this. And we were using the Spanish flu as an example. Well, that wasn't the right example to be using. And so what I was able to get from our West Point, from our United States Military Academy at West Point, were a couple microbiology PhDs, a statistician, and they actually helped us model out so we could figure out where the next hotspot was going to be with COVID. So again, you have a special situation, get special advisors. The bottom left there, that's a picture of some of the folks that we worked with, the health secretary of one of the states that we worked with in, the emergency manager. And what I have found in the Defense Supportive Civil Authorities is our emergency management personnel that we have at the national level, at the state level, everybody from the state level emergency manager to the FEMA regional administrator. I mean, these are very seasoned personnel, and being a military person for so many years, I've been in the Army now for 34 years, I was really pleasantly surprised about how seasoned our professionals are that work disaster response. And again, what I found out too is bottom right there, enforcing force health protection. I found early on that PPE works. And so from the first part of April in my headquarters, we have been wearing PPE. We've been wearing masks the entire time because my headquarters can't telework to work. we have to come to work. And then in order to protect ourselves, it was really the masks. And we figured that out very quickly. And we have been, every day we wear masks, and we have been able to keep our headquarters and everybody in it from getting sick, and which in turn helps keep their families safe and so on and so forth. So I'll go to the next slide. 6 key decisions that we made. Obviously, we needed, I needed some uplift in this headquarters. My headquarters actually expands for the mission that it's going to take on, and then it contracts. And so the Army was able to send me 250 additional personnel to uplift with this headquarters. I expanded out to about 9,000 at the height in May, and out of the 9,000, 3,100 were medical providers. I have a picture there in the center, and really what that is showing folks in hospitals, not alternate care facilities, because what we found is we initially thought, and we were asked to staff and run the Jacob Javits Center in New York City, but what we found is once we got that built, and we had the capability inside the facility, the hospitals were not releasing patients to come to the alternate care facility. And so then the emergency manager for New York City asked us to, said, hey, I need some help in my 11 public city hospitals. I got folks that are waiting in the hallways for care, but yet they wouldn't release them to the alternate care facility. So what we did was we started putting some of our medical providers inside of these hospitals, and then immediately that created the hope. That was like a miracle for them, is what they'll tell you. I have a quote there. You were the miracle we needed when we needed it most. Thank you for being our miracle. And this was from the president and CEO of Elmhurst Hospital that was in New York City. And quite honestly, we would send 85 people, medical providers, into a hospital to augment their shifts, to take over, because they had been converting. They'd have their ICU ward, but then they would have to create more ICU wards out of the pediatrics. They would take, like at Rutgers University in New Jersey, they took the dental school because it had electrical plugs, and it had oxygen plugs, and it had all the equipment. And they turned it into an ICU ward, and they need staff to staff all these, because we found out with this aggressive disease that you needed the ICU capability, and you needed the oxygen, the high flow oxygen constantly for most of these folks that were very seriously sick. Other decisions there, bottom left, integrating the interagency. That's a picture of the FEMA folks that I was working with, the New York emergency manager. We were in the Jacob Javits Center, and we were working together on trying to get the right capabilities in there. So you've got integrating the interagency. There are a lot of great players in there, but you got to know who these folks are. I'll go to my last chart, and then we'll move to questions. Leadership in a crisis. So I would say that we probably worked for about, give or take a couple days, 90 days straight between March, April, and May. And some of the things that you have when you have to spin up that quickly, and you have to, and you're dealing with a very, very much of an unknown all of a sudden and very quickly. How do you handle that? And I would just say I have some pictures here, and I'll talk to all of them. But I think as a commander, and expanding out with 9,000 additional personnel, the guidance, the purpose, and what we're trying to achieve up front, and then clear-cut communications in a very compressed environment is very important. I can't overstate communication, and what also needs to have be included in there is timely communications, because you can have a lot of communication and it's not timely, and then it doesn't mean anything, and you can't do anything with it. It's really important to establish networks, and you think, okay, well, why don't you already have networks established? Well, we do. However, that when you have something as big as what COVID is, now all of a sudden you're dealing with state officials as well as county officials, possibly city officials, in addition to FEMA, DHS, Secretary of Health. There are a lot of folks that are involved, and you got to figure out, a lot of times the ones that actually write checks for things, pay the bills for those decision makers, those are the ones that really have the decision authority, and it's different in every state. So you definitely want to make sure who the stakeholders are and players are. At the end of all this, March, April, and May, we were in 9 different states. We were in 24 different hospitals. We were in 9 different alternate care facilities. And again, we had 3,100 medical providers. And in every state, it was different who we dealt with. I knew who to deal with FEMA. But in every state, it was different who the emergency manager was. Sometimes it was the state police chief. That's the emergency manager as well, dual-hatted. In other cases, it's not. And so you really needed to know, figure out who that network was. Communicate effectively down and in, but also up and out to your superiors and those folks that need to resource you. In terms of carrying the burden of risk, experience matters. And I think that really, as a commander, sometimes less senior folks might not carry the burden of risk as a more senior person may do that. I will say in combat, for example, in Iraq, I found that my subordinates did not carry that level of risk as I did as a commander, because my goal was to get everybody that I deployed over there back home safely. And quite honestly, the younger folks don't think that way. They're just ready to get there and do the mission. But I, as a more senior person, would assess the risk. And very, very important, is that payoff worth the risk that it takes to get there? I think really as a leader, you have to build options, but also maintain flexibility and agility. And in order to maintain flexibility, sometimes you don't have to make a decision immediately or right away. And you might be getting pressed to try to make a decision. But I think too, with experience and time, you learn to be a little bit more patient and to let things shake out just a little bit. And sometimes that drives younger folks a little bit, more inexperienced folks crazy, so to speak, right? Because they want a decision. They feel like we got to get a decision and move out. But really, that's part of what I call having tactical patience. It's really critical, I think, to move and to, whether you're in combat, I put battlefield circulation or incident circulation. Initially, it was interesting. In the Army, we don't have our soldiers go in to do something that we wouldn't do ourselves, right? Or that we don't go check and see. And so initially, I was not allowed. My commander would not allow me to travel, and he didn't want, and rightly so. He was concerned if Laura gets sick, holy cow, she's the land component commander. Who's going to be taking care of this whole big mission, right? So he was trying to keep me safe, keep himself safe, because he wasn't traveling either. And then I know that finally I was allowed to travel, and the first place I went was to New York City. And so my folks had been up there about 2 weeks, the medical personnel and the commander that I sent. And they had done a really great job. But that's when I discovered the PPE really absolutely works. And what I did is I went on 3 trips, and I went to all the different 9 cities that we had our medical professionals in. And every place I went into all of the ICU wards. And this was actually a way, one, to check on my personnel that were actually doing the hardest work, right? In these ICU wards, when you're on shift for 12 or 18 hours and you're fully kitted up in this PPE, it gets hot as Hades. I tell you what, you just start sweating in this stuff. and you got this N95 mask on, you got a surgical mask on, you got this gown on, and you're working. And these folks that are sick require one nurse to about every one or two, actually 4 nurses to about every 1 or 2 patients. That's how aggressive this disease is. But it was also a way for me to check and make sure that our standards in place to protect our personnel from getting the disease themselves were actually in place. And I would find differences in different locations. And interestingly enough, in our alternate care facilities that we worked, they actually had more stringent PPE standards than in some of the hospitals. A couple of the hospitals were a little lax in their PPE procedures, and I just think that was because that they felt safe being in a hospital. In some cases, their staff reached about 20% COVID themselves, and that tells you that the PPE works and you just need to wear it. I have 3 pictures there. I think face-to-face, again, the circulation and face-to-face communications is really important. As General McConville says, our Chief of Staff of the Army, I think it's great. When we send folks to go somewhere, we don't send them to participate. We don't send them to try hard. We send them there to win. And to win was to kill this virus and to overcome it. And I always look back to, as a leader, between Grant and Sherman, and in a letter that General Sherman wrote to General Grant in 1864. And it says, "I knew wherever I was that you thought of me, and if I got in a tight place, you would come, if alive." And so, quite honestly, we want, in the military, have that trust and that bond that regardless, if you're in trouble, I'm going to come and I'm going to help you. So with that, hopefully I didn't talk too long, but I would love to entertain your questions. And thank you again so much for your time today. I really, really appreciate it.
Well, General, that was nothing but extraordinary. And your 33 years of service to our Army and our nation make a lot of our service look like a hobby, quite frankly. So thank you for that, and thank you for sharing what you've been able to implement in terms of your experience base, in terms of the networks you've built with this particular crisis we're dealing with in our homeland. And I'd appreciate it if you'd expand a little more. You've alluded to your combat experiences and how they influenced how you've handled this particular crisis. Between dealing with a different interagency environment, a more domesticated interagency environment, what are the combat experiences that you've leaned on the most in dealing with this crisis, and what's different in particular with the predominantly intergovernmental NGO interagency overseas processes versus what you've dealt with in terms of FEMA, Homeland Security, the Department of Health and Human Services? What are the similarities and differences between those? So,
quite honestly, I see them to be actually very similar, and so I've got to be in roles. I was deployed to Iraq in 2003 on the initial assault that we went into Kuwait and went across the berm, and then in Afghanistan, when we were trying to get Afghanistan, I worked under General Dunford on his staff in 2013, and where we were trying to get Afghanistan to take the lead, in the country for operations and not have, the coalition to be in the lead anymore, but get that country to be in the lead. And so really it was how do you coach, teach, train, and empower someone else to be in the lead, right? Without you being the lead. And so quite honestly, in both those cases, in Iraq, obviously when we got done with combat operations there, literally in combat operations there most of the time, but however, I had a geographic area after about the first 4 months when we started the Train, Advise, Assist mission with Iraq, and I had a geographic area that I was responsible for. Yep. We had a mayor that was there. I worked with him on projects, civic projects, to rebuild their town and to get children back in school, and to just get this environment back together. And so really it was empowering that mayor to, be on their own, giving them ideas, helping them think through. But then in front of everybody, they're the mayor, not me telling the mayor what to say, but coaching him in his office, and then to go out and be able to handle things in his town. Afghanistan, the same thing, being able to work with the Afghans and empowering them to be the lead. But I'll tell you that, quite honestly, in my experiences, both working in Iraq and Afghanistan with the military and working with both of those cultures, you think, oh, well, they probably, were more concerned that you were a female than, anything else. And that absolutely wasn't the case. And what I saw about this is, when they go through something, as they did in Iraq and Afghanistan, they're in the survival mode. And they can tell very easily if you are sincere about what you're doing there and sincere about helping them. And it's like they can see right through you as a person, as to whether you really are sincere about helping them. And so I thought that was probably one of the most things that I was really surprised to find, that they were very good at reading people. And I guess I just didn't expect that, or thought that would be something, at play. But, they were really, it was really pretty tremendous to be able to do that. And this kind of an effort in the disaster response and that sort of thing, I'm just really proud of our country. All of the things that we have put in place since Hurricane Katrina, all of the lessons learned, our country has really done fantastic. I had never done the defense support of civil authorities before until I got to Army North. And I was really happy to be able to validate that national response framework and say, we really got a good product, and I think we have it right. But again, we're not lead. I'm not lead on the southwest border with my soldiers. We're in support of DHS and CBP. COVID, I wasn't in the lead for that. I was in support of FEMA. But then you also have to get all those other stakeholders together that are driving those requirements to FEMA and get them all together as we work towards a solution. And then once you have a solution, how long is that going to be in place? Because if you really think about it, a lot of the resources that we're using are really for our high-end fight. They're really our insurance policy for the Department of Defense to be able to deploy elsewhere. And so every time that we get asked to employ active component or mobilize reservists and things like that, I know that the Secretary of Defense has to really weigh those options. And am I going to commit everything in the homeland and leave us vulnerable if we have to deploy something to Europe or to Indo-PACOM or something like that?
Right, because it ends up being that push-pull between that movement along the spectrum between what ends up becoming not only a service to civil authorities, but a training benefit, versus crossing the line, and then it becomes an impact on readiness.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, really appreciate that, General. And you mentioned with regard to not being in the lead and building coalitions, building networks. A lot of the membership of the World Affairs Council having a diplomatic kind of interest and an international relations kind of interest really gets it in terms of understanding that you've got to build coalitions, you've got to operate diplomatically. Could you expand a little in a homeland environment, which a lot of the folks probably aren't necessarily aware of? You're a little bit more on your theater security cooperation role with Mexico and Canada, and in particular the difference between one of them being on paper considered an ally and the other one considered a partner, where the semantics matter, but a lot of folks may not understand that. Could you elaborate on that a little?
Yes, so just in my, with Canada, obviously we have the Canada-US Defense Plan, and in my higher headquarters at Peterson Air Force Base at NORAD, Northcom, we have Canadian officers that actually serve on the staff. And so, and those are results actually, I mean, with September 11th occurring tomorrow, very somber holiday, but all the reason why now we have Canadians serving on the staff with NORAD and Northcom in defense of North America. And so, so very much more established with the Canadians, and then so with the Mexicans, it's really been. I would even share, you know, it's building that trust with the leaders of the military, and building that trust with them. And so some of, you know, the you have to be. I think that just like what I talked about with the Afghans and the Iraqis being able to, they're very good at sensing if you're sincere or not. Are you really going to help build a bridge and be a good partner and those sorts of things? And so, quite honestly, during COVID, I mean, on both sides, when I took command, the general for the Sedena Army came to my change of command, and he brought his wife, and that was spectacular. And then my Canadian counterpart came to the change of command as well. And so, what better way to start off on you know, what kind of relationship they want to have? I think that was the best way that they could reach out and send a huge message. And so that's why it's important to me, even though during COVID, what we've done is we've done trilateral lessons learned sessions with Canada, Mexico, and us to talk about, you know, all of the things that I shared with you, or plenty other things, you know, lessons learned and things like that we've learned during COVID. And depending on where, you know, Mexico's a little bit behind the U.S. in terms of when they spiked with the disease, but it has really been. They've had a lot of personnel and people get that disease, and then so they're dealing with that across the board. Also, how, you know, with Mexico, how their president uses their military is quite a bit different than how our president, you know, our country uses our military too. So that's a very trustworthy organization in Sedena, and so the president has them doing other things to help the country get past their corruption and their issues with that. So, and we try to level the bubbles, because we see things a certain way in terms of, I talk the Southern approaches into our country, and we want to, you know, national security also leads to national defense. And so how do you work those issues? We think certain ways. We view Mexico and the problems that are there on the border, but then they look at us in a different way, and they see different issues on the border. And so you've got to not look through your own lens all the time. You have to understand the lens that they're looking through, and so that you're not talking past each other, and you can actually make progress in your relationship. So I think a lot of it is building trust. And then through the exercises that we do, whether it's, you know, having a hurricane scenario, which is so likely, right, with the Gulf of Mexico. I mean, we've already seen it with several storms, possibly hitting both Texas and Mexico, or just hitting Mexico and that kind of thing. But the amount of personnel that we have, legal personnel that actually traverse the Mexican and the U.S. border on a daily basis is off the charts. I had no idea. When I got in this job, I felt so uninformed, because I said, I can tell you all about Iraq, and I can tell you all about Afghanistan and the Middle East, and I can't tell you very much about Mexico. And I really had to, you know, study up, because I was just like, oh my goodness. I'd been to Mexico one time as a little girl when we went to Tijuana, and when I was with my mom and dad, and that was it. And I thought, I'm so, you know, how we used to have open borders, how so many people used to go shopping, go fishing, go, you know, do plenty of things in Mexico and traverse the border all the time to where we are today. And so I just think it's so important to build that trust. And then once you've built that trust, you can really make a lot of inroads.
Really appreciate that, General. And in the spirit of building trust too, I know one of the things we didn't tell the audience before we started speaking today was some of the other experiences that you've had besides being an accomplished Army aviator, being a wartime commander. You also were fortunate to spend time both on the Hill and in the White House, both as an aide to the senior military assist to the Vice President, bridging the vice presidencies between Vice President Gore and Vice President Cheney, as well as being the Army's senior legislative liaison for a while. Could you talk a little about how both as a field grader and then as a general officer, how that influence is so beneficial to our elected officials, our senior political appointees, in terms of building trust to be able to lead in the kind of crises we're involved in now?
Yes, I think the just having the opportunity for our military, because it's not just me being in the Army, all of our services have these opportunities. And quite honestly, I see, especially when I got to lead the Army's legislative liaison program as a two-star general, and then we have a fellowship where our military folks go to school and get a degree in legislative affairs. That's their master's degree. They go for 9 months, and then they get to work in a member's office, a member of Congress office, for a year on their staff. And they don't wear a uniform. They wear a uniform maybe once a week. We'd have uniform day, but they dress as part of one of the staff. You know, they're the defense fellow in that congressional member's office. And quite honestly, to see the growth of those personnel, and they're like junior officers, and or they might make major while they're there. Most of them do make major, and we'd have maybe 1 or 2 senior enlisted, like a sergeant major that would be part of that fellows group. But just to see the growth of those young officers being comfortable, confident, competent around senior leaders after that experience. It was almost like watching your children grow up, right? From little toddlers up to graduating from college. You're just so proud of them. But I mean, that is like the growth that occurs during these type of assignments. And it really, we call them broadening assignments because it makes some of the folks are very uncomfortable, right? They're a fish out of the water. And a couple of them kind of adapt really well at first, and others, they really struggle at first and to fit in or what's their place. And it's actually very good for them to go through this. That's why we call it a broadening assignment. And then just to see the maturity and the growth that comes out of it is just really incredible. It also helps you understand for me in the Army and every other service, a lot revolves around what the president's budget that gets submitted in February, all of the work that we do to get our resources and the process throughout the year to get our requirements met and understood and then put into this. It's all works together on a timeline that's really built off of when the president's budget gets submitted in February. And so it really teaches younger officers this doctrine. I call it the doctrinal template for, how the federal government works, and it works around this timeline and this cycle every single year. And you got to know that it's happening because a lot of the things that occur in our services happen on this timeline because of the things that are required by these certain dates. So what a fantastic learning opportunity. Oh my goodness, it was just really tremendous. And learning your role as a military person, that you're nonpartisan, that you're not political, that you're there to do your job and be the best military officer for that person that is in that position, regardless of who it is. And just really an honor to be able to do that.
and the hashtag exists for a reason, and it's very important. And I really appreciate you reiterating that, because that builds confidence in our already highly regarded military. That when the nation sees that we're there to serve, and we're there to serve regardless of administration, we're there regardless of personal politics. That belongs in letters to our congressmen, and that belongs in our voting booth or in our absentee ballot envelope, and no further than that. So I appreciate you bringing that up, General. You also brought up earlier, and I appreciated you bringing it up, about how you had potentially a misperception, or I should say, not a misperception, but a pleasant perception when you were able to feel like you were not necessarily being treated purely as a woman when you were in command overseas. And I know a lot of our younger folks, especially some of our young professionals that are thinking about a diplomatic career, thinking about a military officer career, that are female students, that are young women, that are looking for these kind of examples. What can you share with these up and comers in terms of what to get excited about, what to be on the lookout for, and what to prioritize in their own education and their own professional development?
Yeah, so I would say, because I think, quite honestly, even though I was a pretty good athlete, I was an All-American swimmer before I came into the Army, and in high school and college, so I was pretty good at athletics, and I was in pretty good shape. So but I wasn't very confident in myself, right? In order to speak publicly, or to be able to do things when I was a brand new lieutenant. I didn't have confidence in myself to be able to communicate that way. And so, having been through and the challenges that I've had through my own career, and how you overcome certain things and that sort of thing, is that I just, my advice to young people now is, and I say, and it's not just necessarily to women, it's also to men, is that, you show up for your first job in the military, right, as a second lieutenant. And, and so while, not everybody thinks that you're going to have the best things or know everything to say and do and that sort of thing, as I always tell them,
ma'am, the lieutenants didn't know everything.
Because
I did.
I didn't either. And what I tell them is, don't try to make friends, and don't try to fit in, and don't try to be one of the crew right off the bat, right? Because that generally doesn't work. And so the best thing that you can do is learn about the organization that you're in, learn about your new job. And the best way that you can fit in, quite honestly, is to learn and be a contributor as quickly as you can to whatever your position or your job is. And then, quite honestly, that's how you get noticed, by your competence. And so I think that's just the best advice that I give, is that it's more through your actions and your competence than it is through your trying to fit in socially, I guess. Right.
One last thing, General. Besides the United States Air Force, what keeps you up at night?
So I would say that that nothing really keeps me up at night. I sleep pretty good at night because we work so hard during the day. But quite honestly, it's all the things that we train for and we exercise for. Again, I hate to say that we're like the doomsday command, but we try to think of and plan for and prepare for what could be really hard. And anything that happens that's easier than that's a good day. And so we want to be ready for whatever this nation may encounter and never be surprised. And that's what you don't want to do, not be ready to be able to handle something that you could have planned for if you had put some thought into it and some planning and that sort of thing. So that's what I would end with. And again, thank you so much for this. What a great opportunity. Thank you so much for inviting me.
And General, thank you for leading 34 years of service to our nation. I hope you're not done yet, General. This is important. What you're doing right now is incredibly important for our nation, incredibly impactful for our nation. We're grateful to have you here in San Antonio, and we're grateful to have you as part of the World Affairs Council family. Armin?
Thank you, Tim. Thank you so much, General. I appreciate it. I want to give a special shout out to Bob Nathan, who I met some time ago, and I kept in touch with him at a event. It was a discreet event, so I won't mention where it was, but he was kind enough to pave the way, and I'm glad you shared your wonderful presentation. I've heard it at the Rotary Club. I'm also Rotarian, so I heard your presentation a few weeks ago. So thank you so much. We have so many retired and military on the World Affairs Council board, as well as our membership and our supporters. So thank you so much. This means a lot to us. It means a lot to them. So I know your time is precious. So for you to share an hour with us is very generous of you and thoughtful. So thank you so much for what you do, for your service to the community and to our country.
Thank you, Armin. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you,
tell
ma'am.
Bobby hello.
Please do.
And Armin, for the record, I did not pay the general to mention Rutgers positively there. That was all on her own.
Tim, I appreciate you too, my friend. Thanks so much for serving on the board and for your service.
All right.